Sorry, sir, but this seat has been reserved for a more important passenger. The words cut through the cabin just as Adrian Cole set his leather briefcase down beside seat 1A. The stillness of first class seemed to tilt on its axis. A few passengers darted glances over the rims of their magazines, ears sharpened, eager for drama. Adrian, 40. 5. CEO of Coltech Systems, a software empire quietly running the systems of countless major corporations, lifted his head. His steel grey eyes caught the overhead light. It was not surprise on his face, but a familiar sting of humiliation. He had sat in too many rooms where men dismissed him because he did not fit their imagined portrait of power. Adrian dressed simply, a navy blazer, grey T-shirt, dark jeans, polished leather shoes. No platinum, member badge, no assistant trailing behind, no arrogant swagger. Just a compact carry-on and a folder containing the ink still drying on a $100 million contract. To others, he looked like a well-dressed man of no particular importance. To those who dared to underestimate him, they were about to learn a painful truth. The request came from Sophie Lang, a petite flight attendant with a voice stretched taut with strain. Behind her, leaning casually against the bulkhead, stood a young man with a smirk pulling at his lips. Ethan Ward, 28, a regular VIP, dressed like he was moments away from collecting a trophy for most successful man alive. His pale blue shirt was crisp, designer sunglasses perched on his head, eyes glimmering with entitlement. Adrian's gaze slid from Sophie to Ethan. He heard the whispers clearly. Must be a mistake. No. Looks like they want that man to give up his seat for the kid. That's 1A, the prime spot. For a moment, the cabin became a stage, all eyes on Adrian. He felt a slow burn rising in his chest. An old memory surfaced. 20 years earlier, at an investor dinner, he had been mistaken for an assistant and pushed away from the main table. Back then, he had stayed silent. But here, in seat 1A, silence was no longer an option. "I'm sorry," Adrian said slowly, his voice as steady as forged steel. "But this is my seat. It's printed on my ticket. Booked 3 weeks ago." Sophie faltered, biting her lip, eyes darting toward Ethan, who still wore his faint smirk, as if the game always ended in his favor. He didn't bother to speak, just raised an eyebrow, leaving the dirty work to the attendant. "Mr. Cole," Sophie lowered her voice, almost a whisper. "He is a VIP guest. If you could just step back, it would make things easier for us." The air went cold. Then suddenly, a sharp female voice rang out, firm and indignant. "Nonsense!" Mrs. Harper, a woman in her 60s seated across the aisle, slammed her hand on her tray. "He's in the correct seat. Why should he move just because that boy wants it?" A ripple of murmurs surged through the cabin. Some nodded, others shook their heads. Sophie's cheeks flushed crimson. "Madam, please calm yourself." Adrian leaned forward, locking eyes with Sophie. His stare was calm, but immovable. "And what if I refuse?" Sophie swallowed hard. Ethan smirked, stepping closer, blue eyes glittering with challenge. "Listen, buddy," he said, loud enough for the cabin to hear. "I fly this route every week. Seat 1A is always mine. Nothing personal, just routine. Adrian chuckled lightly, not loud, but enough to pierce his arrogance. Not personal? His voice dropped, each word cutting. When you demand someone give up the seat they paid for, it becomes very personal. The cabin jolted with energy. Eyes flicked from one face to another. A few passengers whispered, "He's right." Sophie, now flustered, clutched her notepad tightly. "If you don't cooperate, the flight may be delayed." Adrian leaned back, arms crossed, eyes cool as tempered iron. "Then let it be delayed." In that moment, the air thickened. Ethan's smile faltered, his lip caught between his teeth. Mrs. Harper smirked knowingly, as if she had seen arrogance punished many times before. To other passengers, this was just a seat dispute. But to Adrian, it was a test. And for Skyline Airways, the airline attempting to push him from the seat that was rightfully his, they had just triggered a storm no pilot could ever land safely. The wheels of rolling luggage rattled against the cabin floor, but the atmosphere remained taut as a drawn bowstring. After the first confrontation, everyone thought the matter would end there. But for Skyline Airways, this was only the beginning. Adrian sat unmoving, composed, his eyes fixed on the window, though his heart thumped beneath his blazer. He had decided. Seat 1A was not just a seat, it was a declaration. From the back of the cabin, Sophie reappeared. This time, she was not alone. Beside her walked a tall, broad-shouldered man in a crisp uniform. Mark Jensen, the chief attendant. His steps were deliberate, each strike of his shoes against the carpet like the drumbeat of an impending clash. "Mr. Cole," Mark began, his voice low, firm, carrying enough weight for the entire cabin to hear. "There has been a mix-up in seating. We need you to move to seat 3C so another passenger can take his rightful place." No apology, no courtesy, only command. Adrian turned, his grey eyes like steel. He asked slowly, each word falling like metal. "Important for the airline's operations, or important for him?" The cabin held its breath. From a distance, Ethan stepped forward, lips curling into a smug smile, his tone dragging as if dripping with charm. "Listen, man. I fly this route every week. Seat 1A is practically mine. Don't make this bigger than it is." Adrian pivoted, meeting his gaze directly. "It is big," he pressed, "when people believe their privilege outweighs others' rights. I paid for this seat. It belongs to me. Simple as that." A ripple of whispers washed through the cabin. Mrs. Harper, the elderly woman across the aisle, raised her voice again. "He's right. This isn't a seat you can just snatch because you feel like it." A man in row 2 nodded, his voice like a gavel. "The ticket decides the seat. That's enough." Mark's brows furrowed. This was not the outcome he expected. The passenger was supposed to shrink, stumble, then stand aside. But Adrian did not budge. Worse, others were beginning to take his side. Sophie intervened, her voice trembling. "Please, everyone, remain calm. We just want the flight to depart on time." "Then," Adrian replied firmly, "let people sit in the seats they paid for. The problem will disappear on its own." Ethan's smirk faltered. He stepped closer, standing near the front row, his gaze drilling into Adrian like a dare. "You really think a few strong words will change anything?" Adrian held his stare, eyes blazing, unflinching. "It changes everything when the one in the right refuses to bow." For a moment, First Class was so silent, the sound of breathing was audible. Adrian's quiet fury clashed with Ethan's arrogance, while the crew hung trapped in the middle. Mark cleared his throat, trying to reclaim authority. "If you refuse to cooperate, we may have to delay this flight, and you will be responsible." Adrian leaned back, arms folded, his tone calm but unyielding. "If that is the cost of defending my rightful seat, I am willing to pay it." The words struck like a hammer. A few passengers chuckled in approval. Others shook their heads, wary of trouble. But no one could deny it. Adrian had transformed a petty squabble into a battle of principle. Ethan spun away, phone in hand, fingers tapping furiously as if summoning help. His grin had vanished, replaced by tight-lipped tension. Sophie and Mark stepped back, exchanging uneasy glances. The situation had slipped out of control. They had not expected a so-called ordinary passenger to defy them so directly. Adrian knew this was only the prelude. They would return, stronger, perhaps with higher authority. But he also knew this. Every minute he remained in Seat 1A was a statement, not just for himself, but for anyone ever forced from their rightful place for the sake of someone more important. Outside the window, the Dallas sky was a perfect blue, sunlight sweeping across the wing. Inside the cabin, tension hummed like a string pulled too tight. Everyone waited for the next move. Adrian inhaled deeply, his gaze distant. He did not know what they would try next, but he knew one thing with certainty. This time, he would not remain silent. And as Skyline Airways kept pushing, they had no idea they were provoking the very man who controlled the software that kept their entire system alive. A push they thought was small was about to unleash a tidal wave. The intercom crackled to life, the chief attendant's voice ringing out, "Ladies and gentlemen, please settle into your seats. We will be departing in just a few minutes." But no one believed her. The air in First Class was dense, every passenger sensing that the play was far from over. Adrian sat upright, hands resting calmly on his lap. Outside, the afternoon sun painted the wing in gold, but inside him there was only ice. He knew this battle was not finished. And indeed, not 3 minutes later, Sophie and Mark returned. This time, they were not alone. Walking beside them was a man in a Navy uniform, his silver nameplate glinting under the cabin lights. The name read clearly, Daniel Ruiz, Ground Supervisor. Daniel strode forward with practiced authority, his polite smile frozen over eyes that were sharp as glass. His voice rang out, loud, deliberate, ensuring every ear in the cabin caught his words. "Mr. Cole, I am the ground supervisor. This will be our final request. You must move to another seat so our priority passenger can take his place." The cabin fell into silence. Magazines were lowered, phones lifted discreetly, ready to record. Adrian calmly placed his folder of documents on the tray table. He looked directly at Daniel, his eyes lit steel beneath the lights. "I hold a valid ticket. I am seated exactly where my boarding pass states. There is no legitimate reason for me to move, and I will not move." The tension stretched thin. Daniel did not back down. His smile slipped into a mask of authority, his tone cooling. "If you refuse to comply with crew instructions, we are within our rights to remove you from this flight." A wave of outrage rippled through the cabin. Mrs. Harper nearly shot to her feet, her voice ringing out like a bell. "He bought this ticket. It's his seat. Why don't you say that to the young man over there? This is blatant injustice." A middle-aged man in row 2 added, his voice heavy and sure, "I've flown my whole life, and I've never seen an airline handle something this shamefully. You're disgracing yourselves." Daniel faltered, not expecting the crowd to turn. Yet instead of retreating, he leaned in harder, raising his voice to redirect the pressure. "Ladies and gentlemen," he addressed the cabin, "this flight will be delayed if Mr. Cole does not cooperate. We ask for your patience." The oldest trick, casting the victim as the villain, shifting passengers' frustration onto Adrian. Adrian felt the heat of dozens of stares. Some frowned, irritated at the thought of a late departure. But many others watched him with sympathy, even silent encouragement. He drew a deep breath and spoke, loud enough for all to hear. "This is not my problem. This is theirs. An airline that believes a valid ticket can be torn up simply because someone else demands priority. If I bow my head today, who among you will it be tomorrow?" Silence. Heavy and charged. A silence that forced Daniel to blink. Ethan, standing in the aisle, no longer wore his smirk. His jaw was tight, his grip on his phone white-knuckled. He muttered under his breath, "This is ridiculous. I can't believe they're letting him stay." Daniel exhaled, fighting to hold his ground. "Mr. Cole, we can escort you off this plane right now. Do not make this harder." Adrian leaned back, his voice low but resonant. "If this is truly a mistake, then the one who should leave is him, not me. Do not force me to pay for an error I did not make." Applause broke out. Not much, but enough for the whole cabin to hear. A younger passenger tapped his fingers against the tray, murmuring, "He's right." Daniel clenched his jaw, his forced smile collapsing. He stared hard at Adrian, then turned on his heel, his voice curt. "Very well. We will make other arrangements." Sophie and Mark followed, their faces strained. Ethan cursed under his breath, hurling a glare at Adrian as if to mark his enemy. Adrian remained still, though his hands were tight fists, his pulse pounding. He had won the small battle, but he knew this was only the prologue. Skyline Airways had planted a seed of public humiliation in him, and that seed was taking root, waiting to erupt into a storm no one could control. Outside, the plane began to taxi. But inside Adrian, another plan had already taken flight, a plan that would cost Skyline far more than any seat 1A could ever be worth. The engines roared, the plane shuddered, then slowly rolled onto the runway. Inside first class, passengers drifted back to their magazines, tablets, and hastily poured glasses of wine. On the surface, it was as if nothing had happened. But inside Adrian Cole, a storm was quietly gathering strength. He sat motionless in seat 1A, the window shade pulled halfway. Sunset light slid across his grey eyes, illuminating waves of fatigue and defiance. No one spoke, yet Adrian still felt the furtive glances, some admiring, some doubtful, and some annoyed that the flight had been delayed simply because he refused to give up. Ethan Ward, a few rows back, had gone silent. He slumped into his seat, phone in hand, but his rigid shoulders and clenched fists betrayed the anger simmering beneath. Adrian didn't need to look to know. Sophie passed by, forcing a strained smile while avoiding his gaze. She set a tray of water on his table, whispering, "Thank you for your patience." The words felt like a thin cloth draped over a wound still bleeding. Adrian gave a small nod. Nothing more. The plane shuddered, then lifted off the ground. The cabin tilted, and crimson sunlight poured through the windows, casting fierce streaks across his face, like the scars of a battle only just begun. Memories rose up unbidden. 2 decades of climbing through the tech world had made Adrian familiar with being underestimated. He had walked into boardrooms and been mistaken for an assistant. He had pitched projects only to be met with dismissive smirks before contracts silenced them all. He had learned to swallow it, to prove himself with results. But this time was different. This was not a gala or a conference room. This was his paid for seat 1A, taken from him in plain view to favor someone called a VIP. They didn't know who he was, but they were certain he wasn't important enough to sit there. Adrian looked at his hands. His knuckles were still taut from the confrontation. He inhaled deeply, then exhaled slowly. A part of him wanted to let it go, as he had done hundreds of times before. But another part, the part that was growing louder, sharper, burning, whispered, "Not this time. Never again." He pulled a folder from his briefcase and opened it, as if to work. But his eyes never lingered on the numbers or charts. Instead, he saw straight through the pages to the skeleton of Skyline Airways itself, running on the very software built by Coltech Systems, flight scheduling, maintenance, crew management. All of it powered by his platform. A flicker of thought passed through him, quick and electric. His heart raced, but his lips curved into the faintest smile. If they believed a seat could be taken from him so easily, let them learn what real power looked like. The clink of food trays snapped him back. Sophie moved down the aisle, serving others, feigning normalcy. Ethan remained silent, though his sharp eyes occasionally darted toward Adrian. Adrian did not return the glance. He didn't need to. The real battle would not unfold in this cabin. It would erupt where Skyline least expected, in their control rooms, in their data systems, in contracts worth hundreds of millions. Mrs. Harper leaned slightly toward him, whispering across the aisle, "You did the right thing. Sometimes you stand up not just for yourself, but for everyone." Adrian met her gaze and gave a small nod. In her eyes, he saw the familiar fire, the fire of someone who had been pushed aside too many times simply because someone else claimed to matter more. The plane trembled as it pierced the clouds. Passengers slipped into sleep or sank into their screens. Adrian sat upright, eyes fixed on the horizon. The deep violet sky stretched endlessly ahead. He thought it looked exactly like his career path, every storm weathered and another storm waiting. He closed his eyes, but his mind did not rest. He thought of Lucas Grant, the loyal COO who stayed later than anyone at the office. He thought of the engineers, the ones keeping Skyline systems alive in real time. He thought of rivals, always circling, waiting for a crack. And he knew, with one decision, Skyline would tremble to its core. The plane glided on through the sunset. To everyone else, it was just another flight. But for Adrian Cole, this moment was the beginning of a quiet sentence. A sentence for those who dared to treat him as less. San Diego greeted Adrian with a sky painted in deep violet. The landing was smooth, but inside him there was no relief that usually came after a business trip. When the seatbelt sign switched off, passengers rushed to their feet, the clatter of luggage bins and murmur of voices filling the cabin. Adrian remained seated, letting the crowd pass first. He noticed Ethan Ward avoiding his eyes as he stepped into the aisle. The arrogant smile was gone, replaced by a tense face glued to his phone. Across the aisle, Mrs. Harper leaned slightly toward him. She said nothing, only gave a nod heavy with meaning, as though handing a torch to someone who knew how to carry it. Adrian returned her look with quiet gratitude, then rose slowly. The terminal was awash in yellow light, yet to Adrian, everything seemed veiled in mist. He pulled his suitcase behind him. Each step weighted, each footfall echoing the memories of the afternoon. The hesitant voice of a flight attendant, the supervisor's harsh command, Ethan's mocking grin. All those sounds blended into a painful refrain that haunted his thoughts. Outside the gate, a black sedan was waiting. The driver, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair, opened the door and smiled warmly. "Good flight, sir." Adrian hesitated. He wanted to reply with the usual curt, "Fine." But his throat tightened. At last, he exhaled, saying only, "We're here." Back at his bayfront home, Adrian left his suitcase by the door, hung his blazer, and sank into a chair in the kitchen. No cabin noise, no probing stares. Just silence and a cold glass of water on the table. Yet the silence did not soothe him. It etched the wound deeper. He sat there, turning the glass in his hand, his mind restless. For years, he had learned to swallow insults, to retreat one step in order to advance two. But tonight, the humiliation would not fade. It had taken root. It demanded an answer. Adrian lifted his gaze, eyes gleaming in the dim light. He knew he was not just a passenger. He was Adrian Cole, founder of Cole Tech Systems, the company powering Skyline Airways' very heart of technology. And Skyline had dared to dismiss him on the very ground they survived on, his system. He picked up his phone. His hand trembled slightly, not with fear, but with anger sharpened into resolve. After 2 rings, a familiar voice answered. Lucas Grant, the COO of Cole Tech, weary but alert. "Lucas," Adrian said, his voice steady and deliberate, each word cutting through the air like a blade. "You're still at the office?" "Yes, I'm reviewing the Phoenix report. Why?" Adrian looked at the glass of water in his hand, the kitchen light reflecting a cold silver line across it. He answered, "I want every contract we have with Skyline Airways. Every clause, every renewal date, every support commitment. I need it on my desk by morning." There was a pause on the other end. Then Lucas asked quietly, "Something happened? You sound serious." Adrian gave a giraffe, smile, joyless. I'll tell you everything at the meeting. Just remember this. As of tonight, Skyline is no longer our priority. I want us ready for a shift." "A shift to their competitor?" Lucas replied, surprise mingled with a hint of anticipation. "Exactly," Adrian said firmly. "They thought a seat could be stolen that easily. Let them learn what the cost of contempt really is." The moment he ended the call, silence returned to the kitchen. But this silence was no longer passive. It was the silence of a storm gathering strength, the kind of quiet that chilled the air. Adrian straightened in his chair, staring through the glass wall at the bay outside. The city lights glittered, skyscrapers rising proudly. Yet he knew with certainty, one decision, one redirected contract, and Skyline would plummet from its peak into the abyss. And it all began with Seat 1A. The dawn in San Diego cast a pale golden hue over glass towers, the city just waking up. But at 122 Harbor Drive, headquarters of Coltech Systems, the top-floor lights had been glowing since early morning. Adrian Cole walked into the main lobby, sharp in a charcoal suit, his steps heavy yet steady. The receptionist greeted him with the usual respect, but Adrian only gave a brief nod. Today he had no patience for pleasantries. Today was about strategy. The glass doors of the boardroom opened, the scent of freshly roasted coffee lingering in the air. Inside, COO Lucas Grant was waiting, a thick stack of documents spread across the table, laptops open, charts glowing on the screens. Lucas looked up, eyes filled with both concern and anticipation. "I've prepared everything," he said, sliding the papers toward Adrian. "The main contract with Skyline Airways runs until the end of this year. They rely on us for 3 critical systems: flight scheduling, technical maintenance, and crew management. If those systems were to be delayed by even a few hours, their entire operation would fall apart." Adrian sat, flipping through pages, his eyes scanning swiftly. The words reflected in his cold, focused gaze, like chess pieces being arranged on a board. "Do they have alternatives?" Adrian asked. Lucas smirked slightly. "Not in the short term. We hold the only integrated solution at this scale. But," he paused, "there are at least 2 major competitors eager to secure our platform: Aerolink and Pacific Skies. If we shift priority to them, Skyline will collapse within months." Adrian leaned back, fingers interlaced. In the morning light streaming through the glass, his face was calm, but his eyes burned with fire. "They made me an outsider on their own flight," he said slowly, his voice heavy as an iron hammer. "Now I will make them outsiders in their own industry." The atmosphere thickened. Lucas swallowed, then nodded firmly. He was used to Adrian's decisiveness, but this time it felt different. This was fury wearing the mask of strategy. Adrian bent forward, circling a clause in red ink. "From this point on, every support request from Skyline is to be handled at the bare minimum required by contract. No overtime, no priority. They go to the bottom of the list." Lucas scribbled quickly, his eyes flashing cold agreement. "And the competitors?" "Reach out immediately," Adrian instructed. "But quietly. I don't want Skyline to see it coming. Let them realize only when it's too late." Lucas gave a thin smile. "I know exactly who to call." A brief silence hung in the room. Adrian stood and walked to the glass wall, gazing down at the bustling streets below. Traffic flowed like a living network. Skyline Airways was the same. It looked vast and powerful. But Adrian knew that pulling just a few threads would throw the entire machine into chaos. In his mind, the faces replayed. Ethan Ward's condescending smirk, Sophie's reluctant smile, Daniel Ruiz's commanding tone. They fused together, symbols of a system that believed it had the right to push anyone aside. Adrian clenched his fist. They think Seat 1A is a symbol of power. But yesterday, that seat became the most expensive one Skyline has ever sold, and they will pay for it. Lucas remained silent. He knew that when Adrian spoke like this, it was never an empty threat. It was a sentence. The morning passed with hushed phone calls. Lucas connected with rival CEOs, planting whispers about opening doors for partnership. Adrian reviewed every strategy, directing each detail. The Coltech machine began shifting course, slowly, deliberately, like a river redirecting its flow. By noon, sunlight poured into the boardroom, illuminating Adrian's face. He closed his eyes briefly and drew a deep breath. Inside him, yesterday's humiliation had already transformed into fuel, a silent fire that could not be extinguished. For Skyline, it had been just a seating error, but for Adrian Cole, it was the beginning of a downfall they themselves had set in motion. 3 days later, the first phone call rang through the Coltech office. Lucas walked into Adrian's office, handing him the phone, his voice low. "You'll want to hear this." From the speaker came the panicked voice of a regional manager at Skyline Airways. "We have a major problem with the scheduling system. Tomorrow's flights are stuck in the crew assignment queue. Support requests have been sent, but no one has responded. The servers are running slower than usual. We're facing the risk of mass delays." Adrian leaned back in his chair, his expression calm, though the corner of his mouth curled into a cold smile. He did not respond immediately, letting the sound of desperation hang in the room. Lucas intercepted. "We've received your report. It will be handled according to contractual priority." The line went dead. Silence filled the room, broken only by the ticking of a clock. Adrian set his pen down on the polished wooden desk. "This is only the beginning," he said slowly. By the 5th day, the calls grew relentless. This time they came from Skyline headquarters, the voice of an operations director, tight with strain. "Mr. Cole, we've noticed a clear change. In the past, any issue was answered by your team within the hour. Now it takes a full day. We need to know what's happening." Adrian lifted his coffee cup, took a slow sip, and replied evenly, "You are receiving exactly the level of service outlined in your contract. No more, no less." The line fell silent. Only the sound of heavy breathing lingered. A week passed, and Skyline began to resemble an old clock slowly breaking down. At Denver Airport, passengers waited for 4 hours because the crew scheduling system failed. In New York, a flight was cancelled because maintenance data did not sync, leaving the pilot grounded. News began leaking to the press. Skyline Airways hit by technical disruptions, passengers outraged. In Coltech's office, every article was printed and laid neatly on Adrian's desk. He scanned them, eyes still and calm. But inside him, a cold sense of justice spoke loudly. On the 10th afternoon, Adrian's desk phone rang. Lucas pressed speaker and nodded. On the other end was Thomas Vera, Skyline's chief operating officer, his usual authority gone, replaced by strain. Mr. Cole, we really need to talk. The level of support from Coletech has changed. We are willing to discuss adjusting contract terms to restore things to how they were. Adrian folded his arms, his voice deep and steady. We are still honoring the contract, Mr. Vera. If you feel that is not enough, perhaps you should reconsider how you treat your partners. Respect is not written into clauses. It is practiced in your daily choices. The boardroom fell into a heavy silence. On the line, Thomas stammered. I'll have to report this to the board. The call ended. Lucas turned to Adrian, his eyes a mixture of shock and admiration. You just made them truly afraid. Adrian rose and walked to the glass wall. The San Diego sunset painted the sky crimson, casting his shadow long across the floor. He closed his eyes, the memory of that flight surging back. Ethan's contemptuous stare, Daniel Ruiz's commanding tone, the humiliation of being singled out in a silent cabin. Now they would understand what it meant to be delayed. And this time, it wasn't just one flight. It was their entire airline. The news spread quickly across the industry. Aerolink and Pacific Skies, Skyline's competitors, sent discreet invitations. We are ready to discuss expanded cooperation. Lucas placed the letters on Adrian's desk. Adrian gave a single nod. Proceed, but slowly. I want Skyline to feel every step of the fall. And so, while Skyline scrambled to patch errors, Coletech poured its energy into quiet negotiations. The balance of power was shifting, and only Adrian fully understood the inevitability of it. In the stillness of his office, he whispered, not to anyone else, but to himself. They thought a seat was just a place to sit. But my seat 1A has become a verdict for an entire airline. 2 weeks after the fateful flight, Skyline Airways was no longer the proud airline it once claimed to be. At Chicago Airport, long lines of frustrated passengers stood before glowing red "delayed" signs that filled the screens. In Los Angeles, pilots and flight attendants complained of chaotic schedules, overlapping shifts, and flights cancelled at the last minute. The press had begun calling Skyline the limping giant. On social media, thousands of angry posts flooded the feeds. Did we pay for chaos? Skyline can no longer be trusted. In the top-floor glass office in San Diego, Adrian Cole stood before the window, his hands clasped behind his back. The city below still moved with its usual rhythm. But he knew that somewhere, on the other side of the phone, Skyline was in disarray. Lucas walked in, carrying a cream envelope sealed with a bold emblem. Skyline Airways, CEO office. They've sent a letter. Adrian turned, unsurprised. He took the envelope, opened it slowly. Inside were a few typed pages, ending with a jagged blue signature. Dear Mr. Cole, we sincerely apologize for the unfortunate experience you encountered on your recent flight. It was an unfortunate mistake, not reflective of Skyline's commitment to service. We hope for an opportunity to meet and discuss extending our partnership and adjusting terms to ensure mutual satisfaction. Adrian read it once, then again. Each sentence echoed like a knock that had come too late. He set the letter down on the desk, his gaze unshaken. Lucas watched carefully, then asked quietly, "Do you plan to reply?" Adrian shook his head, his voice cold as steel. Apology after the damage is not apology. It is only proof that they have felt the weight of their own contempt. The next day, a call came directly from Skyline's CEO, Edward Mason. His tone was soft, almost pleading. "Mr. Cole, I want to speak with you personally. What happened was truly regrettable. I cannot allow a small misunderstanding to ruin such an important relationship. Skyline needs Coletech now more than ever. We are ready to adjust the contract, increase support budgets, whatever it takes to restore things." Adrian sat still in his chair, his fingers tapping steadily on the polished wood. He let Edward speak, let the words of desperation fall into the air, then answered concisely. "We will fulfill the current contract. But after that, Skyline is no longer a priority for Coletech." On the other end, Edward faltered, his voice shaking. You mean to shift to our competitors?" Adrian did not deny it. He released a single sentence, slow and final. "Remember, all of this began with 2 simple words. Your staff could not say, 'Enjoy your flight.'" After the call, Lucas entered, his expression filled with disbelief. "You just refused Skyline's CEO directly?" Adrian turned his chair to face him, eyes sharp. "This is no longer about a flight. This is about how they define human value. They chose the wrong priority, and now they must pay the price." Lucas gave a firm nod, his lips pressed tight. He knew the days ahead would see Skyline sink even deeper. That evening, alone in his kitchen, Adrian poured a glass of water and sat watching the bay's night horizon. The letter of apology lay neatly on the table, the golden lamplight casting shadows over its lines. But to his eyes, it was not remorse. It was a certification that Skyline had finally realized who truly held the power. He closed his eyes, recalling that moment on the flight. Seat 1A, the contemptuous glance, the commanding voice. Then he had been just a passenger, dismissed. Now he was the man deciding whether Skyline would survive or collapse. The seat they tried to take from him that day had become the most expensive seat in their history. 3 weeks after the cold phone call with Skyline's CEO, the American aviation industry was shaken by an unexpected announcement. Coletech Systems had signed a strategic deal with AeroLink Airways, Skyline's biggest rival. Financial papers ran bold headlines. "Adrian Cole pulls resources from Skyline, delivers vital technology to its competitor. AeroLink soars with new management systems." Meanwhile, Skyline descended into chaos. At the operations center in their Chicago headquarters, computer screens flashed with errors. Operations directors crowded around the table, their voices firing like gunshots. "We've had 5 cancellations just this morning. Customers are slamming desks at service counters. We've lost control. The tech team says we need to wait 48 hours for Coletech to respond." CEO Edward Mason slammed his hand on the table. His face was crimson, sweat dripping from his brow. "How did we let this happen? Who allowed Coletech to move to AeroLink?" No one answered. The only sound was the frantic hammering of keyboards. While Skyline burned in San Diego, Adrian Cole sat in Coletech's grand boardroom, facing AeroLink's leadership. His hand rested on the new contract, his voice steady. "Coletech commits to prioritizing AeroLink in every support. You will receive everything Skyline once had, and more." Applause filled the room. Aerolink's CEO gripped Adrian's hand tightly. "You've just given us the greatest advantage of the decade." Adrian offered only a faint smile. In his eyes there was no triumph, only the calm of a man watching justice operate in its coldest form. News rippled through airport corridors. At ticket counters, one passenger grumbled, "Skyline isn't punctual anymore. Next time I'll fly Aerolink." Another added, "I heard they're running Coldtech's new system, probably more reliable." Those comments were Skyline's obituary. No courtroom, no accusations. Just the loss of customer trust, and the giant airline plunged into freefall. In the glass office, high above the city, Adrian stood by the window, gazing at the night below. Lucas entered, laying a fresh report on the desk. "Skyline has lost 12% market share in just 2 weeks. Their stock dropped 18%. Aerolink has doubled its bookings." Adrian gave a slight nod, his eyes still on the sky where aircraft lights etched long streaks against the dark. "They are learning the lesson I wanted them to learn." Lucas asked softly, "Do you feel any satisfaction?" Adrian was silent for a moment. In his mind, the memory of that flight resurfaced vividly. The flustered attendant's voice, the supervisor's threats, Ethan Ward's smug smile. He remembered the feeling of being pushed aside in first class, made to feel like an outsider. He turned, his voice low but firm. "This isn't satisfaction. This is balance." They dismissed a human being and lost an entire future. Meanwhile, at Skyline, an emergency meeting dragged into midnight. The operations director held a trembling newspaper. "Aerolink has launched Coldtech's system. We've officially lost exclusivity. If this continues, we won't just lose passengers, we'll lose existence itself." Edward Mason slumped into his chair, his head in his hands. He knew one seat, seat 1A, had started it all. And Adrian, sitting quietly in his office, wrote a few words into his worn leather notebook. "Never underestimate the person sitting next to you, because that person may hold the very lifeline you depend on." He closed the book, his eyes sharp as a blade. Skyline had lost seat 1A, and with it, its future. 1 month later, Skyline Airways was no longer the proud giant that once ruled the skies. Their Chicago headquarters drowned in crisis. The press office worked day and night, yet every statement they released only sent their stock price further down. On social media, images of passengers sleeping on airport floors had become the defining symbol of their collapse. And then on Adrian Cole's desk, a thick envelope appeared. The seal read clearly, "Skyline Airways, Office of the CEO." Lucas set it down, his eyes watchful. "Do you want me to open it?" Adrian shook his head. He took the envelope and pulled out the pages one by one. Blue ink scrawled across the paper, the handwriting trembling. "Dear Mr. Cole, I, Edward Mason, CEO of Skyline Airways, extend my deepest apologies for the humiliation you endured on our flight. The behavior of our staff is inexcusable. I personally take responsibility. We wish to restore our partnership. We are prepared to meet any conditions Coldtech demands." Adrian read every line, his expression unchanged. He folded the letter and placed it back on the desk. Lucas asked softly, "What do you think?" Adrian rose, walking to the glass wall. Outside, Aerolink planes lifted into the night sky, their lights tracing long streaks across the darkness. He spoke slowly, evenly, with a steel edge in his voice. An apology after the damage isn't remorse. It's fear. The next day, headlines announced Skyline had lost another 20% of its market share. Passengers were defecting to Aerolink and Pacific Skies. Investors fled. Cold, merciless titles spread across financial papers. Skyline Airways, an expensive lesson in disrespect. Meanwhile, Coaltech was consumed with new contracts. Engineers worked tirelessly, each success for Aerolink cutting deeper into Skyline's wounds. Adrian oversaw it all from his office, but he did not smile, nor did he revel. He saw only an undeniable truth. Sometimes justice does not come from a courtroom, but from the silent machinery of power. One evening, when everyone had gone home, Adrian sat alone in the vast office. On his desk lay 2 letters. The first apology, polished and decorated with empty words, and the last, trembling in desperation. He placed them side by side, then whispered as if to himself, "They disrespected one man and lost an empire." In memory, he saw himself again in seat 1A that day, Sophie fumbling, Daniel Ruiz issuing threats, Ethan Ward smirking with arrogance. He remembered the moment he had to choose, give up the seat or stand firm. And he had chosen to stand. That moment, seemingly small, had rewritten the entire story. Night fell, the city below glowing with light. Adrian leaned back in his chair, eyes closing gently. He was not seeking victory. He was seeking balance. And now, it had come. One seat, just a single seat, had become a verdict. In the world of business, people often believe power is measured by cold numbers, stocks, contracts, quarterly reports. But the story of Adrian Cole reveals a different truth. Real power lies in how you compel others to respect you. One seat, one seemingly small act, "Sorry, sir, you must give up your place for someone more important," became the spark. For Skyline, it was just procedure. For Adrian, it was a public humiliation. And that humiliation spread, erupted, and turned into a wave that swept away an entire airline. What is the lesson? Sometimes justice does not need to shout. It arrives in silence, in the gaze that does not bow, in the decision to remain standing even when an entire cabin wants you to sit down. Skyline thought they had lost only a passenger, but they did not know that passenger was the very man holding the soul of their system. And when the truth was revealed, every apology became meaningless. For us, the ones watching this story, we must ask ourselves, have you ever been underestimated, pushed aside, simply because someone thought you were not important enough? If so, remember, you have more power than you realize. Strength does not always belong to the loudest voice, but often to the quiet resolve. Do not let anyone else decide your worth. And when the moment comes, use that strength to rewrite the story, for yourself and for all those who were never given the respect they deserved. If you believe respect is not a privilege, but a birthright for all of us, hit like on this video. Do not forget to subscribe so you do not miss the next stories, where justice continues to speak in everyday life. And I want to hear from you. Leave a comment with just 2 words: stand tall. Because sometimes simply holding on to your seat is enough to change the entire world.